So, we're ready for a cruise. We have this ship of sadhana now, laden with treasure, full of ballast from the Veda, from the Upanishads, the Gita, the whole of the Tantric tradition. Everything is on board. We're ready to start looking at Sri Aurobindo's magnum opus, The Life Divine. We're not going to start for a couple of weeks, close to the birthday of Sri Aurobindo, 15th of August. On the 17th, we'll actually begin our coverage with the first chapter. But there's a prelude. We saw, when we looked at the Rig Veda, that the idea of the sacrifice, which is central to the whole of Vedic civilization, has its truest placement inside the aspirant. This is made more and more visible in passing ages. The offering that we make is always symbolic of ourselves. The ascent of our consciousness into a communion with the powers of the cosmos, with that from which the cosmos is an expression, speaks to the depth of our offering. How much of ourselves we are willing to give, that's how much we can receive. That's how great a unity we can come into accord with. And when we looked at the Upanishads, they're even more direct than the Veda. They speak outright. All this is Brahman. Everything is divine. The asuras, the gods, the bird, the old man leaning on his staff, what is above you, what is below you, what is around you, is all that one reality. There is no division. Live in that. Renounce your personal claim and live in enlargedness. Experience delight. Go beyond mere pleasuring. Go beyond suffering by living in an ocean of bliss, which is what we experience when we break down the walls of the ego. When we let the will of the world course through us and no longer have a petty, personal motive in what we do. This is accentuated in the Gita. But there, the antinomy between the freed self and the bound world is overcome by adding a still greater dimension than simply the realization of the immaculate self, of the perfect Brahman, because it calls us to a personhood that goes beyond personality, to a reality that goes beyond the impersonality of Brahman, to something unnameable, indefinable, of which all of this is an expression, in nature is itself the outer form of an inner power which is inherently divine. And there is the secret of a supreme being and a supreme nature and the real fount of our souls. Because yes, there is a universal reality, but it does not cancel the individual or personal reality. Rather, it is all from one common source. And this is the great tradition of Vedanta, encapsulated in the Bhagavad Gita. But we went through Buddhism and Jainism, the Shramanic fields where the world is renounced in favor of the realization that lifts us out of specific personal suffering. There is a truth in that, but the Tantra called us back to a still greater truth, that you can live in moksha, in a state of mukti, but also recognize that this world is an expression of a vibrant power which is conscious, which is full of delight. And that Shakti, the great power, the Mahashakti, is what breathes itself into this, and at the base you can have mukti as well as mukti. Great delight and enjoyment of the world, which is beautiful and not simply a scene of suffering. Enlarge your consciousness, become one with it all, and as you become oceanic, suffering disappears. Pardon me, it seems my voice is a little light tonight for such a heavy topic. So with all of this gathered into us, we looked at the bhakti tradition. Bhakti is commonly thought of as being simply devotion, love the divine. Nonsense. Bhakti wants you to become one with the divine in every aspect of yourself, to know the divine, to love the divine, to become one in feeling and sensation, to act out that oneness bodily is the feel, the root of the perfect bhakta. So, with all of this, we see a consummation of the Indian spiritual tradition boiled down to oneness. To move from division to unity, to move from unconsciousness to full consciousness, to move from insentience and suffering to delight, to discover Sat Chit Ananda. Because when you really are aware of yourself, what you really are, you experience delight. Sat is existence. Chit is consciousness. Ananda is delight. And that you are. So, Sri Aurobindo in his yogic vision also insists on oneness, but a oneness that does not ignore the world, that does not allow us to isolate ourselves in a rapt bliss, that we should remain engaged in the world, as the Gita says, for loka sangraha, for the holding together of the world. Because how we live from a yogic consciousness has a big impact on all that is around. So, to perfect life, not to renounce it, is what Sri Aurobindo envisages. When he came back from England, you will know his biography already, in 1893, having finished with Cambridge. He returned without the idea of practicing yoga, but nascent in him was the idea of gaining liberation for his country, to throw off the yoke of the British tyranny. And as I never tire of saying, when the English arrived in India, she was the richest country in the world. And when the British left India in 1947, she was among the poorest. I'll let you do the arithmetic. Sri Aurobindo became interested in yoga first because he heard that it gave power. And he thought, if I could get power to liberate my country, it's worth the effort. And so the first thing he began to practice was pranayama. And he had no competent guru, he just started doing it for hours and hours a day. Pranayama is a dangerous practice, even when guided by a guru, to do so much of it. And when he became irregular about his practice, he was sick for a period of 6 months before he recovered. And basically through all of 1907, he felt a great want of energy and did not feel the power to go forward in his yogic practice. I should say, that is not the complete picture, because Sri Aurobindo had early experiences, even before leaving England, of what would become full spiritual realizations later. When he was reading Max Muller's translations of the Upanishads in London, he suddenly had the mental realization of what is the nature of the Atman, the silent self. But a mental picture is not the thing itself, and he knew the difference. When he arrived in Bombay by ship in 1893 on the Apollo Bunder, as he stepped onto the soil of India, he felt a great peace descend into him from above. And a darkness that had weighed upon him like a blanket of inertia since he had left at the age of 7 for England suddenly get lifted. So there was peace and light again for the first time in many years. When he was in Kashmir, he experienced the vacant infinite. When he was on the shores of the Narmada, looking at an image of Kali, he felt the indwelling Godhead there. When he was riding in a carriage, and there was a danger of an accident, he felt welling up from within him an unknown Godhead, which then receded from his view. So he had tastes, he had glimpses of what later would come. But he never practiced yoga until he took up pranayama. What really interested him was when his brother was terribly sick and looked like he was on the verge of passing away. And they sent for a tantric to come. And the tantric simply walked into the room, looked at him, took a cup of water and made the sign of an X over it and said, "Here, drink this." Barin drank it and started getting well immediately. Sri Aurobindo then knew there must be power in yoga. So he thought to try. As I said, he had that early experience with pranayama. By the way, one of the results that he reported from that was that although he was a natural poet, he could write on his own maybe 4 or 5 good lines a day. But after practicing pranayama, his head was filled with prakasha, with light, a mental light, and he could write hundreds of lines, extended expiations of poetry, without let or hindrance. So that was remarkable to him, the kind of energy and illumination it brought. But he had quit doing it. He continued with his revolutionary work. You'll know that he was trying deliberately, with all of his being, to arouse India to an awareness that politically they could expel the British. And he was a leader in the Nationalist Party, which had a great gathering at Surat in late 1907. He was there from around the 24th of December on to the end of the year. And at the close of that, he was the most prominent leader of nationalist movement in the country. Somebody got word to him that there was a guru who might be willing to work with him, given his difficult schedule. So this man, Vishnu Bhaskar Lele, came to meet with Sri Aurobindo at a friend's house. And he said, I can teach you. I'll teach you meditation. He said, but you have to give me 3 days of your time. And Sri Aurobindo said, I have speeches every day. I have to meet with people constantly. How can I give you? He said, well, when you can find 3 days to give to me, then I'll work with you. So eventually Sri Aurobindo was able to arrange for that in the city of Baroda. And he went to a friend's roof and sat in a dwelling up there. And Lele said, sit. Now, close your eyes. Just look. Look at your mind. You'll see that thoughts don't arise within your head, but they come circling in from outside. Sri Aurobindo had never thought of them. He said immediately his mind became like a windless sky, vast, and he was simply watching. And then a thought would try to come in. Lele said, every time a thought comes in, you catch it and you throw it out. So within 3 minutes, Sri Aurobindo had realized what is the silence behind the manifestation of this world. Within 3 days, his time with Lele, he had completely silenced the mind. There was no ripple, no rupture to that silence. Now here is a key point. What he experienced was a blowing out of the world existence. There was only this enormous, infinite, vast vacancy. You couldn't name what it was, but the world looked cinematographic, like you were standing outside of it, apart from it. And that world had undergone a nirvana, an extinction into some Brahman existence. So, he had to go back and speak. He had to continue his political career. And he said to Lele, how can I speak in this condition? Lele said, walk to the platform and wait. Something will suggest itself to you. And he did. He walked up there. He saw, as he passed, a newspaper which had a headline. It made an impression on him. He got up there and he made a speech on nationalism, which greatly moved the audience. It's one of his greatest speeches. And the words did not arise from the paper, they just, in a sense, flowed into him from above. This is crucially important because it shows that despite the cessation of ego involvement, one can still work in the world from a spiritual consciousness. Even with the annulment of that sense person, one can still work in the world, and he did, continually meeting innumerable people, giving speech after speech after speech. He did this for days and months in early 1908. And this was his first great realization. Now, interestingly, this idea of a reality that lies behind what seems to be a figment of reality in the front later became absorptive and brought the world into it, so that the world was not excluded from that realization. This deepened in May 1908, just a few months later, 4 months later. This first realization happened in January 1908. A realization which, for many fields of spiritual discipline, would have meant the end of the practice. You get that, you're done. Sri Aurobindo had it in 3 minutes. For most, that's the end. Sri Aurobindo kept going. And when He was arrested by the British on charges which a year later would collapse. He was put for a period of time in solitary confinement, and he sat there. And as things became clear to him, he heard something like an inner voice suggesting to him, I tried to tell you that I have other work for you. I tried to get you to leave the political field, but you think you're so important that you think India will not be free unless you do it. Do you understand that I'm in charge of things and I'm going to take care of it? I have better personalities who are more suitably fitted for this job than you. So I'm going to teach you what I want you to do. And among the things that came to him while he was in prison and practicing was a copy of the Gita. And he started reading it for the first time with a different eye, and he said, I see what it's trying to tell me. And then this voice, which was becoming, clear as a higher self to him, said there are stages and ranges of consciousness which lie above. But look at the world around. And as he looked, he saw in the warden Vasudeva. He looked at the magistrate. He saw the face of Krishna. He looked at the compound, at the walls around him. That too was Vasudeva. Everywhere he looked, he saw the face of the divine, not a blank, abstract existence, but a conscious existent, a person who uses the abstract, who uses the stuff of impersonality to formulate itself and stands at the center of all beings. So this was a positive to pair with what you might say was the negative. Vasudeva, the universal divine, paired with the nirvanic Brahman existence. Both of these realizations were part and parcel of his nature while he was still in jail. When he was released, soon thereafter, within a year or so, he made his way down to Pondicherry. A third phase of his yoga was already in development then, which was to realize spirit and matter as one. To take the force of nature, the Shakti behind spirit, and make it part of the sadhana as well. Although he had no knowledge of Tantra, this is the aim of Tantra. He was beginning with a realization based on Vedanta, and now trying to bring synthetically into his yogic practice the whole scope of the tantric disciplines without knowing them. But sort of emerging from within was a scheme of yoga which would aim at establishing the principle of peace throughout his being. Not just shanti, though, not just samatha, which is equality to all things, but sukham, an inbuilt happiness. A sukham that from this peace, from this equality, erupts in a divine smile and laughter. That is peace. It is positive, it is dynamic, it liberates through its very touch. And then a principle of power in the yoga, but bringing this power into the body meant, in a sense, reversing things, not living first from the body principle, but living from the divine principle and inviting it down and in, like there's a descent of a higher nature into a lower nature, a secret to natural existence that has to be imported into the very cells of our body. And then, a vijnana practice. That is, to elevate the consciousness to ranges above and beyond the mind. The mind can't be the summit of conscious existence. Look at the mind. It's bewildered. It can't decide what's real, what's not real. There must be a field of awareness which is true in itself, which is based on truth of being, and so is undivided, undimmed by manifestation. In Sanskrit, that's called vijnana, and in English, Sri Aurobindo called it the supramental. So to reach those layers of supramentality and import that into the being, into peace, into happiness, into the physicality of our life, all of that. And if you can get those three things based on the principle of eternity, based on the Trikala Drishti, that is the capacity to live in the present, but bring all the riches of the past and be forward moving into the future, all in an eternal now, then you're ready to perfect the body and bring into it health, arogya, so that disease cannot approach it. So that beauty lives from it, radiates from it. And that the body can be the very seat of that principle of Sat. We think of Sat being at the apex, but Sat is secretly at the base of matter. And so Satya, truth, should have a material consummation. We should be able to make the body the very field of divine activity. So this was his yoga. And then, if that was the third great realization that he had, which came to fulfillment around 1912, then the fourth would be his ascent directly into the supramental consciousness, which he was working on and pulling down all the way to the end of his life in 1950. So we can see, in a sense, telescoped in just a handful of years, the entirety of the Vedantic and the Tantric tradition expressed in his yogic practice, in his actual experience. And then come two visitors from France. A letter has come saying, looks like Sri Aurobindo is going to receive two people from France, from the highest levels of culture there, who want to come and practice yoga with him and take him as their guru. And they were Paul and Mira Richard, who arrived in 1914. Paul, in 1910, had the brief meeting with Sri Aurobindo that changed his life and brought back later, after a period of 4 years, his wife, who was herself already an expert yogini in her own field. So they came to Sri Aurobindo and immediately proposed to him that, we love your philosophy, why not publish it? Why not write about it? So Sri Aurobindo, having said that a yogin should be able to turn his hand at anything, couldn't say no. So they convinced him that he should bring out a journal, and then what to call it. Eventually, after a couple of months, they decided to entitle it Arya, in the original sense of the term, which means the noble, the high-flighted. And it was in August of 1914, 100 years ago this month, that the first issue of Arya was to be presented to the public. It was eventually a financial success as well as a literary success. The British did everything they could to stop its publication. The French were not particularly helpful, but it came out for the first several months in both a French and English edition. We'll speak more about this next week. We have more to prepare for, but today, the 3rd of August, ironically is I think the date that Germany declared war on France, isn't it? Back in 100 years ago today. Ironic that as soon as Sri Aurobindo has sent to print this idea of a life divine, the world erupts with a contagion of division. We have not calmed it yet, apparently. But you can't get to outer peace if you don't have inner peace. And so I challenge all yogins and yoginis to make their hearts and minds and bodies the first fields of peace. And that interconnection thereof will be the field in which peace can surely be established. So it's up to us, in other words. You always start at home. So, an unusually short talk tonight. But maybe you have some questions you'd like to ask.
Why was the letter X used, do we know? Is there symbolic of the letter X? That he made the shape of the letter
Oh, the
X?
tantric?
Yes.
When he did
When
that?
he did that.
No, it was just a tantric ritual.
Okay, so
It may have looked like an X to Sri Aurobindo, who was in the room watching.
Mm.
To the tantric, it had a certain symbolism. And the water might, for instance, have represented the consciousness of the person suffering. And so he drew the X with a knife, by the way, above it, as if to cut out the impurity and allow purity to be restored. By the way, you know, it's an interesting point. When Sri Aurobindo writes about purity, it isn't necessarily moral purity that he's interested in. He's interested in the sincerity of the being to be its real self. And that means that all the constituent elements of our nature should be functioning as they should. They should be in harmony. They should be in some sort of collaborative unity. And for a whole system, that's what purity means. And so when something gets out of joint, we suffer a dis-ease. So when we have a fever, for instance, as his brother had, it meant something's out of joint. So you reinstall purity, and it goes away. So you can try this with your consciousness sometimes. Instead of running to the medicine cabinet when something goes wrong, lie in your bed and see yourself in perfect health. Envision that. And call that back into your being. In a sense, take that image of yourself and massage it into your nature and see if it doesn't relieve that dis-ease that you're experiencing. It takes some time for the body to learn how to do that because it likes the idea of relying on something external to itself to come in and save the day. But the body has its own capacity for rejuvenation. Now, sure, there are some things that we have to take medicines for. I understand. I'm not saying never take a medicine again. There are unrecognized powers within us, though, that if we evoke them, can outstrip what medicine can produce. Naya, what question have you for me tonight?
You can always ask a question. How do you believe in the Godhead? So certainly, and I'm sure Sri Aurobindo did, and that's why he could
Hmm.
start his journey.
Hmm.
How do you believe unconditionally?
Sri Aurobindo did not believe in anything when he began the practice of yoga. He had an intensity that he brought to the practice. When he was asked to do something, he simply did it, and it produced the result. But he had no particular belief. He had no interest in those things. Had no idea of theistic religion as being relevant to his life until this experience, in a sense, overtook him when he started practicing yoga. He was hoping to get some power to liberate the country with. That never happened, by the way. The liberation of India occurred through other people, just as that voice told him it would. And he was taken fully and permanently out of the political field within a year or so. As far as one's belief, I do think that faith, Shraddha, is a great power in the practice of anything, whether it's yoga or you're working for a doctorate or simply trying to get to work on time the next morning. To have the faith that you can do it. A faith in oneself, a faith in an alignment of forces and principles that permit it. Belief is something else. Belief is a mental conviction about the divine. The only thing that convinces finally is the experience of it. You can read the Bible or the Gita or the Upanishads, and you can have a mental idea of what it means. That image that you have can work to draw to you like a magnet the thing that it represents. And so as you begin to feel its approach nearing, the faith in you may build and build into something quite intense, which creates in you a state of receptivity, so that when it comes, you're ready and you can step out of your old world into a new world. Because face it, the experience of the divine is not like something you've ever had before. It's not an experience to add to other experiences that you've had. It completely throws over everything that you've ever touched or lived before. Your world is revealed to be much richer and larger than you ever suspected. There are two, I feel like I'm giving a theology lecture now. There are two primary experiences that they used to speak about, which are life-changing in the field of spiritual practice. One is a numinous experience of the divine, and the other is a mystical experience. The numinous experience is when you meet God as the huge other. There's this enormous being that suddenly confronts you and dwarfs you and in the face of it, you feel small and pitiful. And you're so grateful that it doesn't crush you. It's like King Kong has agreed not to step on you. He goes his other way. The mystical experience is utterly different. It's when that and you approach each other and become one. And there's a melding of being into being. It's like the drop of water merging into the ocean in some images. It's like a heart becoming one with a greater heart, but still the same heart beats in both. One is not annihilated by the other, but there is an intense communion. Both have a reality. Both strike the heart and mind in a way, and it can't be the same again. And with some people, of course, when this experience falls upon them, it means the end of the world as they knew it. They'll never be the same. I don't know if you've heard of Robert Johnson, who was a Jungian analyst, but he had an important experience like this in his early life, and he said it ruined me. Couldn't do anything after that. You know, I couldn't go out with the same zest and pursue a career because I kept seeing other and greater realities around me all the time. Sri Aurobindo would smile at that and get it, because that indeed is the truth. But you can't get knocked off your plate by having one of these profound experiences. What you have to do is widen out and become large enough to hold the experience and continue to act in the world. Maybe you don't go back to the same job that you had before. Maybe a light illuminates your path and takes you to something that is more appropriate for you, especially given the new consciousness that you have. But you don't quit the world. This is Sri Aurobindo's point. And I guess it's my point too, because I'm accentuating it, right? So, to get back to Neha's question about belief, I think that I would want to concentrate myself with great vigor on the subject at hand and say, I have the necessary equipment, I have the aspiration, I have the focus, the power of concentration to give myself to this discipline. And if I work sincerely on it, surely there will come that breakthrough that I've heard about. I'm not going to guess what that reality is. I'm not going to forecast what it will feel like, but I'm going to give myself to it and work with Shraddha, with faith, that I can do it and it will come. And in so acting, it will change my inner environment. And then my outer environment will have to change to coordinate itself with my inner environment. And then eventually the whole climate will support this shift in awareness that I'm aiming for, and that thing will come. It will be drawn to me. And then I will taste the infinite. Then I will step out of time for a moment and see what eternity is. And then I will try to live as an eternal being in time, and tasting bliss even when my body is ravaged with pain. So I guess belief may be helpful, but belief is a shallow thing which can be shattered with the next intellectual idea that comes along. Belief can be rattled. It has to be something that's deeper in us, that's committed to the practice, and it is the practice that brings the experience, that brings eventually the realization. So first the practice, then the experience, then the realization, and upon the realization, the transformation can be built. Yoga is a long process. The first step. The first ascent in consciousness, then the descent, then another ascent, and another descent, and like this, it is a cycling, moving up, moving down. So whatever riches you get, whatever insights, whatever peace, whatever bliss, whatever illumination, whatever power comes to you, you have to bring it back and work it into the tissues of your life and even into your body. And this is where I think, it's, again, I'm a broken record on this, where I think that Hatha Yoga has its greatest application is not so much in the going there as in when you get there, then to bring it back and use the asanas as molds in which you pour this elixir and cement it into the body. Then you've got something. Naya, do I get a C- on that one?
8 plus.
I got an F for effort, I think. So, another question? Madan, you always have one.
Well, mine is more mundane type. When Sri Aurobindo was at Cambridge, one question is how many years was he there? And then the controversy about his not appearing for the writing test and all that.
Yeah.
And Peter Hayes made a big fuss that he told a lie, stuff like that.
He did.
So I was wondering what your take was.
Yeah,
Too
well,
strong a language to be told a lie. And he just didn't appear.
No, he didn't appear, and yes, he told a fib. He got out of it, he weaseled out of it. So what? He was 21, 20 or 21. He wasn't meant to be an ICS man. I think the world can be grateful for what happened. If somebody had told Sri Aurobindo that when his life was appraised, they would look back and say that everything he ever did was golden and perfect, and he never made an error, he would have laughed them out of the room. He was aware of his own imperfections, of his flaccid attitude towards certain things, especially in his college days. He didn't want to be bothered. He didn't want to work that hard. Well, remember, for one thing, he may have recognized that I'm not born for that life. I'm a poet. Not only that, he's skilled in a lot of different intellectual things. He's going to 2 universities at the same time. He's going to Cambridge, but he's also studying for the ICS. That's like a separate 4-year program all by itself. So he's doing them in tandem. He's taking higher mathematics. Nobody until recent years understood that this guy knew calculus. He knew all kinds of things. He was intellectually brilliant in everything that he did. And by then his father had quit sending money regularly. So they didn't even have food to eat. If he got high tea in the late afternoon, that was the meal for the day for all of the brothers that were there in England. His father had started taking what money that he got from being a medical doctor in India and giving it to poor people there, trying to relieve the suffering. I mean, what he did came from a great heart. And he figured that his boys were enterprising enough that they would find a way. But it's darn hard when you're basically just a teenager and you're in an unfriendly town like 19th century London that doesn't care a hoot about you, to make your way. So he was virtually starving, He was as thin as I am, maybe thinner. So yeah, so he skipped the writing exam. It may be that Peter Hees has written a biography that doesn't please everyone, but in the main, not in the main, but I think you can say plainly that the facts that he's reported in his biography are well researched. It is by far the most literate and informed and full biographies out there. It's a biography that I spoke about with Peter long back when he was first researching it, and I made several recommendations to him about the manner in which he could approach and write it. I don't think any of my advice was taken. I would simply say that writing a biography is different than writing a typical book on history. You need to be able to tell a story, to make something come to life. And I think the cardinal defect of Peter's biography, since you bring it up, is that he does not have that touch. I think he's a capable historian, but to my reading, Sri Aurobindo does not emerge as a living figure in this book. So, there's your controversy. I'll go a step farther and say that although I think that the book could have been better written, I don't see any reason why the book should not be published and circulated in India. As far as I'm concerned, academic freedom, press freedom demands that it be so. And let the reading public decide whether it's a good book or not. In fact, I think it would have been far more advantageous to everyone if that debate had been carried to the halls of history and let actual historians deal with the matter and comment about it. Now the issue is radioactive. Nobody would touch that issue. And it has spillover effect, and I think damages India's integrity as a place for great thinking in the way that his biography has been received. So I'm sad about that. Well, more could be said. This is probably not the place or the time to do it. Another question? Oh, surely.
So was that Sri Aurobindo's first realization was during the 3-day that he studied? I mean, what was the first thing he felt or saw of the Godhead?
Simply silence. He was not seeing anything. There was no thing to see. Behind all things was this indescribable vacancy or undefinable reality. which was sheer silence. So all the phenomena bubbling on the surface of the world was not that. So this is the realization that in some ways is cognate in both Shankara's Advaita Vedanta and early schools of Buddhism, not the Mahayana so much as the Theravada. But that was the first blush of the experience. And then, as I said, as it grew and cemented itself in him, then that, in a sense, reached out and reincorporated the world into it. And that sort of set the stage for that second major experience when he was in jail and had the realization of Vasudeva everywhere, which is another name for Krishna. Vasudeva, the son of Vasudeva. Patronymic. So far, so good? Okay. So then, no more questions, and we'll meet next week and we'll go farther, and that will be the last before the 15th of August. Obviously, on the 15th of August, we'll have a special occasion at 10 in the morning. You're welcome to come for that Darshan Day celebration. And that's a Friday, so we'll probably also have something in the evening at 6:30. And we'll have a lunch after the morning program, and we'll have a dinner after the evening program, like that. And then on August the 17th, on that Sunday, we'll start our study of the Life Divine. I'm not saying the Life Divine won't figure on the 15th itself. I'm just saying that our study will begin then. Thank you for your patience. Namaste. Jai.